Hi, welcome to Dreamsical Designs by Danielle. In this video, I show you how to design and sew your very own halter peplum top with a ribbon necktie. As you can see, it comes with a matching pencil skirt with ruffle and a matching lace bolero, which I show you how to make in my other videos. Let's get started. Start with your basic bodice block with darts. If you don't have one, watch my tutorial video linked in the description below. You need to draw a curve from the high point shoulder to the base of the armhole on both the front and back bodice blocks, making sure to connect with the existing arm side curve as you approach the armhole base. The top will end at your waistline as we'll be attaching a peplum skirt to the waist. Since we don't have sleeves, we need to remove ease at the armhole base. Redraw the waist to armhole curve such that it hugs closer to your body. Start with small increments like 0.25 inches if you're unsure how much to remove. Drew the armhole to waist curve on both the front and back blocks to make sure they're the same length. For the back bodice block, it will no longer be cut on the fold as a zipper will be attached at the center back. We also need to add a V below the neckline to give space for a neck ribbon tie. Mark 3 inches down from the center back and 0.5 inches inwards on the back neckline curve. Connect the 2 points to form your V. Don't forget to redraw your seam allowances and hems. These are the final front and back halter top patterns. Cut one of the front top pattern on the fold from your main fabric and cut 2 mirror images from your back top pattern from your main fabric. The halter peplum is a full circle skirt. First, we need to draw the inner circle, which represents our waist. Take your waist circumference measurement from your halter top and divide that by 6.28. This is your circle radius. Mark the radius on your paper around a center point. You can use a tape measure like I am or a compass. Second, we need to draw the outer circle, which represents the peplum length. Starting with the front length, draw a line that is 3.5 inches long plus a 1-inch hem. Directly opposite that line on the back of the circle, draw a line that is 6 inches long plus a 1-inch hem. Draw a line that is 4.5 inches long plus a 1-inch hem perpendicular to the first lines, and this represents the length of the side of your peplum. Using a curved object, like a flexible ruler, connect the ends of the lines. This is your asymmetrical peplum skirt for your halter top. This next step is optional. If you wanted to pair this top with a pencil skirt with ruffle down the front and you don't want the peplum to overlap with it, you can cut out a portion of the peplum top. My cutout is on the right side and approximately 3 inches in length along the inner circle. Divide the peplum in half as the back zipper will attach at the center back of the peplum. Don't forget to redraw your seam allowances. These are the final halter peplum pieces. Cut one of each from your main fabric. And that's it, we're done our designing. I highly recommend making a prototype to confirm the fit of your design. This is my cotton woven fabric with the 3D bunnies on it. This is my lace fabric that has two-way stretch. You see it has a nice floral pattern. And this is my nude polyester lining. You will need one invisible zipper that is 20 to 22 inches in length. To cut your fabric, place your pattern pieces on the wrong side. Use a rotary cutter or scissors. Remember to mark your notches and your darts. After you finish cutting out all your pattern pieces, you need to cut out the neckband. I didn't make a pattern for this since it's just one long rectangle. You're going to cut out a rectangle that is 5.5 inches wide by the width of your fabric. My fabric is 44 inches wide. You will also cut out a second rectangle that is also 5.5 inches wide and the width of your fabric, and then cut that rectangle in half, giving you 3 rectangular pieces. I didn't make a pattern piece for the lace waistband either, since it's just a rectangle. The width is 2 inches wide to account for a 0.5 inch seam allowance, and the length is whatever your waist circumference is. These are my cutout pattern pieces for the top, the main cotton fabric, polyester lining fabric, and the secondary lace fabric. This is my overlock foot that I'm going to use to overcast the raw edges of my fabric to prevent them from fraying. You can also use a zigzag stitch or a serger if you have one. We're going to sew the darts on the top, the waist darts, and the chest darts. I'm using clips to align the legs of the darts on both sides. Here are all my darts clipped for the top and the lining. We're going to use the same method for sewing all the darts. This is an example of sewing the dart on the lining. We're going to follow those marked lines that we made earlier when we cut the fabric. You're sewing at a regular stitch length up until you get closer to the dart point. Then you will decrease your stitch length to a 2 or even lower to a 1.8 or even a 1.6. And when you get to the very edge of the fabric, you're going to place the stitch one at a time until you reach the very point of the dart. Once you've reached the dart point, you will stitch off of the fabric. Pull out an excess amount of threads because you're going to hand tie those by hand. Before you hand tie those threads, you want to make sure that there isn't any bunching in your fabric. Hand tie a couple of knots to finish off your dart point. Press the darts to one side and the dart point flat. Connect the lining with the outer fabric, placing right sides together. You want to clip or pin the arm openings and the top portion of that back fabric. Here are my pieces after they've been clipped together. When sewing the curve of the arm opening, you want to lift up your presser foot and place it down rather than stretching and pulling the fabric. This is what your top should look like after you've sewn together the arm openings and the top part of the back. Turn your pieces right side out. Press the seams flat. This is what your seam should look like after you finish pressing. Notice that you cannot see the lining on the outer side of the fabric. Connect your front and back top pieces together, placing right sides together like so. You want to lift up the lining like this on the back side, and once you've done that, it's time to flip that over to the front side. You'll do the same on the front side, lift up the lining so that the lining is right side together with itself and attach it like so. Make sure that the seams are open flat and aligned. This is what your top should look like after it's been clipped together. As you can see, the right sides of the lining are together and the right sides of the outer fabric are together. And what you want to do is sew from that top of the lining all the way to the bottom of the outer fabric. When you get to sewing the seams together, you want to make sure that they are flat and opened and aligned. And then sew till you get to that very center part of that seam. You're going to lift up your presser foot and pivot, and then continue sewing. This is what your top should look like after you finish attaching the lining and the outer fabric together. Turn the fabric pieces right side out like so. You may have to shake it a little. And this is what it'll look like on the inside. You see the seams are completely hidden like this. And then if you flip it over to the other side, this is what the front side should look like. Now it's time to press those seams open and flat. After you finish pressing your seams, it's time to top stitch the upper part of your back and your arm openings. When top stitching the fabric, I do it from the right side of the fabric, and I try to get as close as possible to the edge, but it's really up to you and what you're comfortable with. This is what my top stitching looks like. After you finish top stitching, attach the two peplum pieces to the waistline of your top. This is the peplum piece for the right side of the top. We're looking at an inverse version of it. So we're going to clip or pin it to the left side of the top like so. And this is the peplum piece for the left side of the top that we're going to clip or pin to the right side. After you've clipped or pinned your peplum to your fabric, it'll look like this. Now remember to attach your lining to it as well. So there should be 3 layers attached together like so. When you get to the front portion of the peplum piece, you want to hem that seam allowance like this. Just roll it in half by 1/4 inch and roll it in half again by 1/4 inch, and then just stitch over it like so. Follow the same process for the other peplum piece. When it's at the front of the top, you want to take that seam allowance and create a hem. So fold it in half by about 1/4 inch, and then fold it in half again by another 1/4 inch and stitch it in place. After you finish attaching the peplum piece to the outer top and the lining, finish the hems of the 2 front peplum pieces. Fold the seam allowance in half by 1/4 inch and then 1/4 inch again, and repeat the same process for the other peplum piece. Top stitch that hem in place, going all the way up to the waistline of your top. This is what your peplum should look like after it's been attached to the top and hemmed at the sides. And now you see that seam allowance that's still exposed at the front, we need to hem that. Fold the seam up by 1/4 inch and 1/4 inch again, and then clip or pin that in place. You're going to top stitch that hem in between the left and right peplum pieces. This is what your finished hem should look like. It's time to work on the lace waistband for the top. Fold that in half, right side together, and then clip or pin in place. Stitch a straight line across the waistband. You're going to sew a straight line from one end of the lace waistband to the other. After sewing the lace waistband together, trim the excess seam allowance down to about 1/4 inch or less. Turn the lace waistband right side out using a safety pin that you carefully feed through to the other side. Once you've finished turning the lace waistband right side out, press it flat. This is what your lace waistband should look like after it's been pressed. Next, attach it to the waistline of your top. You will need to use pins to pin it in place, aligning the center of that lace waistband with the seam of the waistline of the top. You want to place that stitch such that it is slightly above the waistline seam allowance. Make sure that your seams on the wrong side of the fabric are laying flat in one direction. This is what your top should look like after you sew the lace waistband. It's time to attach the 2 back pieces together so that you can sew the zipper on. I like to put in a basting stitch first before attaching the zipper, and I stop the zipper 1 inch from the bottom. Clip or pin the seams in place. You're going to sew from that top of the back all the way to the bottom of the peplum. Use a basting stitch of length 5 to join the back pieces together. When you get to 1 inch from the bottom, change that to a regular stitch length. This is what the back of your top should look like after it's been stitched. You need to press those seams open and flat. You will also need to prep your invisible zipper by pressing those zipper teeth flat. This is what your top should look like after it's been pressed open and flat. This is what your invisible zipper should look like after the teeth have been pressed flat. You'll see it has this fold to it. Now we want to attach the zipper to the top, lining it up with the very top of the back all the way to 1 inch from the bottom. Clip or pin it in place. Before I take this to the sewing machine, I like to hand sew in a basting stitch. This helps ensure that it doesn't shift when I'm sewing it on the machine. You're welcome to skip the hand basting step and sew it directly on the machine. Once you finish hand basting the zipper to the seam, you need to remove that basting stitch that we put in earlier on the sewing machine, just using a seam ripper. You can see that it's already starting to look like an invisible zipper, where the zipper is completely hidden. To prep the zipper for sewing, you need to unzip it, and you're going to use an invisible zipper foot on each side of the zipper tape. This is my invisible zipper foot. If you don't have one, you can also use a regular zipper foot. You just won't be able to get as close of a stitch to the teeth. When you're sewing an invisible zipper, you want to press the zipper teeth flat so that you can get as close as a stitch as possible. Once you're finished using the invisible zipper foot, you will need to close that zipper, moving the slider body all the way to the top stop. Then you're going to take your regular zipper foot to stitch the bottom portion of the zipper. This is what your finished invisible zipper should look like. As you can see, it is completely hidden. This next step is optional. If you don't want the zipper teeth to directly touch your skin, then you can add this rectangular flap as a barrier. It is 1.5 inches wide by however long your zipper is, with a 0.5 inch hem on all four sides. Now that your zipper has been attached, hem the peplum. I'm using a 0.5 inch hem. I start by folding it in half by 1/4 of an inch, and then fold it again by another 1/4 of an inch and clip or pin in place. Continue doing this for the full circumference of the peplum. This is what your peplum should look like after it's been clipped or pinned in place. You want to stitch across the full circumference. I chose to sew my hem from the wrong side of the fabric so that I can make sure that the curve of the hem stays nice and smooth and that there is no bunching. You can take it nice and slow and continue to adjust the hem as you go to make sure that it's smooth and flat. This is what your hem should look like after it's been sewed. It's time to press that flat. If you are using a thinner or lighter fabric, you should add interfacing to your neckband to give it more structure. My fabric is pretty stiff already, so I chose to skip this step. Once you've added your interfacing, place the smaller pieces on the one long piece right side together and clip or pin in place. Sew a straight stitch from the top to the bottom of the neckband for both of the pieces. This is what your neckband should look like after the 3 pieces have been attached. You need to press those seams open and flat. We need to mark the location on the neckband where it is going to attach to the neck portion of your top. The first method is by clipping or pinning the neckband temporarily to your top to determine where that endpoint is. The second method is using a tape measure to determine the length of your neckline from your pattern. Once you've marked the endpoints on your neckband, you want to fold it in half, right sides together, and clip from each end all the way up into those marked locations. You're going to sew the neckband together from the very end up into the point that you marked. Once you finish sewing the neckband together, you want to clip those corners as close as possible to the stitching. Turn the neckband right side out. Using a pointed object, you're going to insert that into each end of the neckband to push out those corners. Once finished, you're going to press that neckband flat. You're also going to need to fold the seam allowances inwards from the portion of the neckband that wasn't sewn and press those flat. This next part is a little tricky. You need to attach the neckband such that it encases or encloses or clamps over the seam allowance of your neckline. When attaching the front and back pieces to the neckband, you need to make sure that the front and back pieces are adjacent. They shouldn't be overlapping when shown on the outside. And you'll need to use pins to hold it in place. When sewing the neckband to the neckline of the top, make sure that both sides of your neckband are aligned and that the seam allowance of your top neckline is evenly covered. I'm doing a top stitch on the right side of the fabric and going nice and slow so that I have good control. Be sure to continually check that your neckband and the seam allowance of your top neckline are aligned before you stitch it in place. When it's time to join the front and the back pieces together, make sure that they are adjacent and touching, but there shouldn't be any overlap. This is what your neckband should look like after it's been attached to the top neckline. You can see that the seam allowance is completely enclosed. And that's it, your top is now complete. I hope you found this video helpful. If you'd like to make the matching skirt and lace bolero, watch my other videos. And if you make your own halter peplum top, please tag me. I'd love to see how it turned out. Happy sewing!